Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruhu wa nu'minu bihi wa natawakkalu alayhi wa na'udhu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina. Wa ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan rasulullah. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Brothers and sisters, as we witness events unfolding not just in the United States, but as we see very tragic, collective, national events happening across the world, we have to remind ourselves that nothing that is appearing in our times, what will appear in the future of human beings on this earth, is something that Allah is nothing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already explained to us. The reasons for every event, particularly what nations are doing, the way that nations govern themselves, the way that there is this proclamations about following the rules of Allah, the rules of God. And then we see the very opposite happening in the practices throughout the world. And so don't be alarmed, don't be surprised when we see the social, political fabric unraveling in countries like here in the United States. Let us not be surprised when we see a genocide of over 2 years in basically 2 different places on earth, in Philistine and in Sudan. And for the most part, we see that the response by those who have the capacity to respond to these genocides are very often not doing anything but being spectators and giving lip service to what we see happen. And so for the purpose of the khutbah today, I want to remind myself and remind you what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made clear to us in the Quran and what the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has reminded us and told us about. Why? Don't be surprised whenever you see unfolding in societies amongst human beings who are not following the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If anything, be surprised that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not destroyed nations today at this particular juncture, the way the nations who were disobedient, especially the leaders of the nations, were disobedient to the guidance sent down by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Brothers and sisters, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us in the Quran, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu taqullaha haqqa tuqatihi wa la tamutunna illa wa antum muslimun. O you who believe, fear Allah as he should be feared, and die not except in a state of Islam. Die only in a state of submission to the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Brothers and sisters, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has laws, unlike the laws that may change based on who's the president, who are the cabinet officials here in the United States. The laws of guidance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us in this Quran are unchanging. They are laws that apply in every place where human beings are gathered. They are laws that will not change based on who elected officials are. They are laws that will govern us all the way up until Qiyamah. And so these divine laws of history give us certain principles that we can depend on. Unlike these man-made governments and the laws that we come up with, we can depend on these laws for stability that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. And one of these laws that's enshrouded in the Quran and amplified by the Prophet Muhammad is that boom, that oppression in a society is not just a sin. Whether it's done by individuals or it's done by collectives, it's not just a sin against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's also a cause for civilizational collapse. All we need do is look at the stories in the Quran that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us. Maybe the ultimate example is this Fir'aun, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had Prophet Musa alayhi salam and Prophet Harun alayhi salam confront, bringing to him a message coming for a people who were slaves in the society in which this Fir'aun was ruling over, coming from a people that had no respect by the elite and the aristocrats of the society, and coming and warning this Pharaoh that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given a set of laws that we're to govern ourselves by, and what you are doing in oppressing these people is not a matter of politics. It's not just a personal sin, that your entire civilization can be destroyed and can be collapsed because of the collective doom that has been enshrouded into the society. And so we see this mighty Pharaoh read the history about the kind of strength that he had, the kind of obedience from the society that he had. They were scared of him. They were worshiping him as their Lord. Read about that. This was a man who was not in a position for 4 years and had to concern himself whether the electorate would put him back in office. This was a man who considered himself the ultimate authority in Egypt, in Misra, at this particular time. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala humbled him. It wasn't just a personal sin that will affect Fir'aun in the hereafter. It was a complete civilizational collapse. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought down the entire order. Those who remained silent, who were following along with what Fir'aun was putting down. They didn't try to organize in a way They felt that what Musa alayhi salam and Harun was saying, and I'm not saying everybody amongst those people, but the majority was so beholden in their hearts to following this man who's declaring to people, worship me, I am your Lord, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in this example that is encased in this eternal book of Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala destroyed every one of those people in the process of liberation of the Bani Israel at that particular time. Without going through so many of the different stories, but we know the examples of the odd people that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us in the Quran. We know the examples of the Thamud, the Midians, throughout the Quran. When the sins of the people, their individual sins, reach the level of systematic oppression of people, denying people the right to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the manner that Allah has prescribed, then it's not just a matter of individuals standing in front of Allah on Qiyamah. It now becomes a matter for that society to be punished for how they ignored the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and institutionalized dhulm, create a system of oppression, to create a system in which poor people are driven further into poverty deliberately so that people could be enriched. A society when the moral standards of society go along with what the people at that time feel that they want to do, not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prescribed for human beings. Brothers and sisters, the history, the Quranic history of various societies is a history of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's, those societies that were destroyed, were not destroyed because of weakness and poverty. They was destroyed when the power of the arrogant, the power of the strong dominated the weak in society, that the weak had no chance of getting from up under the systems of oppression. And Allah gives us these examples throughout the Quran, how these societies were destroyed. Allah reminds us in the Quran as well, which is served to a reminder of our divinely mandated responsibility to give dawah to this society, to warn the communities in which we live, warn them about the rules of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not what some elected officials coming into office every 4 years or every 2 years in state legislatures, but what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has established for permanent and everlasting guidance for human beings. It's a reminder for you and I. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mandated we stand up, and for every tyrant that is in government in positions, and tell them that they're going to hell if they don't turn it around. That responsibility has not been put on us as if we are messengers of Allah. We have the responsibility to warn the leaders, the rulers of society. But your and my primary responsibility would be to take this message of submission to those people that we have access to on a day-to-day basis. Those fellow students in your high school, in your college classes, in your middle school classes, the neighbors in the hood where we live, to enlighten them about this guidance, to live a life that people will begin to ask you and I, there's something different about the way that you carry yourself, the way that you speak to others. What is it about you? What is motivating you? What has shaped and molded you to be the kind of person that you are? That's something that each and every one of us have this responsibility. We may not be able to reach whoever I was about to say idiot, whoever the person is in the Oval Office, if the Oval Office continues to exist and not bulldoze down and turn into some dance office or something. But you and I have the responsibility to take this message of submission to those that we come in contact with, those that we can spread this dawah, have this responsibility to learn ourselves and to tell others that my and your personal sins are magnified when what we are doing is pushing people further down in the societies in which we live. That brings about the damnation of entire nations, because this is a sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He tells us about in the Quran Majid. Brothers and sisters, as you know better than I, there's so many narrations from the Prophet Muhammad about this thing of doom, this thing of oppression that served as reminders for us. One of these narrations that's contained is agreed in the Sahih of Bukhari, the Sahih of Muslim, very short hadith, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warns those who have authority or have influence over others to beware of the dua, the supplication of the oppressed. But there's no barrier between the supplication, the prayer, the dua of the oppressed and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when we see people sleeping in the woods, when we see them, as we go down the highway, sleeping under bridges in the middle of the winter, whether it's snowing or raining and all of these things, many of these people, and I would dare say many, especially today, are not just lazy bums, as we can so easily want to characterize people when we see that they are not providing for themselves and their family in a way that this society gives the appearance of offering to everyone. That many of these people and many more in America today, you'll see them sleeping under bridges. You'll see them sleeping in their cars. You'll see them coming to these food banks that we try to give this food distribution. Why? Because of deliberate decisions on the part of those who are controlling the allocations of funds that come down, whether it's talking about feeding children in school, or whether it's talking about supplemental food benefits. These are deliberate decisions to further impoverish, to further push down in this society those who are at the bottom realm of the society. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving this ummah. We didn't have to wait for some brilliant political theoretician to come up with a body of ideas that will uplift everybody in society. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave all of us access to the secret for success, for individual and collective success in this society. He has given us clear reminders of what happens when you and I and those of us who claim to be mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala neglect our responsibility to warn those who are causing oppression and to not be a part of this systematic exclusion of people from basic things like food, clothing, and shelter. بناتنا في الدنيا حسنات وفي الآخرة حسنات وقنا. Brothers and sisters, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us a system of spirituality, a system of social laws, a system of guidance that does not encourage passive spirituality, but it encourages and builds in us moral courage to stand up, to take a stand in the society in which we live for that which is right. The system of Islam does not encourage a kind of passive spirituality in any of us. As long as I can feed my family, as long as I can clothe and give shelter and have heat in the winter, that's a passive kind of spirituality. If we're not paying attention and not at least making dua for those who are in the social and economic underbelly of this society, and oftentimes are there through systemic acts of oppression and not just laziness, not sloth, but they're systematically being pushed further and further down. Islam does not develop in us a passive spirituality where we think that just because I'm all right, I can feed my family. My family eats 3 squares a day. My family has a roof over their head. They have heat in the building where they live. That's a kind of passive spirituality, that there's no room for this in Islam if we look at this example of the Prophet Muhammad. Look at the example of those who were with him. Look at the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad when he reminded this ummah that whatever risk, whatever he provides us for and beyond our needs is a test for you. He provides us what he provides us to see what are we going to do with those provisions. Do we need 7-course meals every day in our homes? When people are starving, our neighbors, the people in the streets are having a difficult time. It was difficult before, but due to government policy. I'm not talking about in Somalia somewhere. I'm talking about what the leaders of the nation so proudly claim this is the richest country on the face of the earth. And we have more billionaires than anywhere else on the planet. So if this is true, and it is true to my understanding, that risk, those provisions, that money, that income that are provided, not through illegal and unlawful ways, but that lawful provision is a test for each and every one of us. What are we going to do with the surplus that we have that goes beyond the needs that I have for myself and for my family? So during these times, let's not be those. This is not, I can't think of the name of this particular practice, but this is not like a yoga kind of exercise. Islam is not something that creates passivity in us to go and get and twist our bodies into shape and be able to be so limber we can tie our bodies into knots, to develop just a peaceful, humble just spirit. And then we can act like we're blind and walk past the people on the streets who are suffering. To hear the cries, the appeal of brothers and sisters all across the planet because of the internet, that we're able to instantly see the suffering and the needs that are going unmet through organized system of oppression. You and I can do better. You and I must do better. You and I must understand that we are this is the final ummah raised for the guidance of mankind. There's nobody coming after us. There's no ummah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will raise to be an example for the people. How do you worship your Lord? What do you do with your surplus wealth? What do you do when oppression, when doom is staring the society in the face? There's no ummah coming after us to show us a different way. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed this Quran and has preserved it. It ain't going to leave us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has preserved the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu is going to be with us until we die, until this whole earth, humankind is no longer humankind walking on this plane. It's going to remain. That's why when people who were born after the prophethood of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu when they're lowered into the grave, they're going to be asked about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu. Who was this man? What's your name? Right? Who was this man? There's no other prophet, there's no other ummah to give the guidance to mankind other than this ummah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu. You can't do it practicing a passive kind of spirituality. This is not the practice, this was not the sunnah that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu left behind for us. Dua, oh Allah, support the oppressed wherever they may be. Oh Allah, break the backs of tyranny and arrogance. Oh Allah, protect us from becoming oppressors. Knowingly or unknowingly, oh Allah, make us leaders of justice, voices for truth, and servants of the weak. Do not destroy us for what the unjust amongst us do. We come into Salah.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة